Afternoon, and thank you, General Ham. I appreciate that. And I appreciate being included in this event today. I would really like to talk a little bit about my role as Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment and some of the goals and initiatives that my team is focusing on. Just to set the environmental piece here, we are really transitioning from an era of countering violent extremist organizations to near peer competition. So that means we have to pivot as an organization to understand what it takes to really go up against China and Russia and prevail and win. We've seen that our adversaries pose a threat not only to our technological advantage, but our economic advantage. And economic security is national security. We have seen that there are many influences out willing to steal our intellectual property, to come into our universities and research laboratories and take our valuable trade secrets and national, very important information and exfiltrate it. In fact, just this morning, I was taking part in a task force meeting that is chaired by the SecDef, David Norquist, and our new Vice Chief of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General John Hyten. And we're talking about protecting critical technology and what are we going to do about the fact that we have a lot of Chinese students in our universities. We have a lot of Chinese employees in critical industry positions, and we know that our information, our data, our technology, our know-how is being exfiltrated. And the challenge for us is what can we do at the DoD level? And from my point of view, looking at contract language clauses to make sure we don't have known bad actors working on projects with DoD dollars. And then how can we influence the interagency process to make sure that as a whole of government, we are protecting against this. We tend to be very, very good at defensive measures against these types of things, but we're not as good at offensive measures. And that's what we're talking about doing a little bit more. But if I back up and look at this in my role, under the framework of our national defense strategy, what do I see as my job? I think it's twofold. One is to get capability downrange to the warfighter as quickly and cost effectively as possible. And secondly, to ensure that we have a secure and resilient defense industrial base. Now, using the framework of our national defense strategy, which has 3 lines of effort. One is lethality. We can't forget we're about war fighting, and we want to take our dollars and put them towards war fighting. Secondly, strengthening partnerships and alliances. And thirdly, reforming the way we do business. Under this framework, my team late this summer went off-site, and now that we've gotten through the bifurcation of the old AT&L into A&S and R&E, we're forward-focused on being acquisition and sustainment, and we wanted to make sure that we really codified what we were doing in very clear goals and objectives. So we came up with 6 of them. First, to recruit, develop, and retain a diverse acquisition and sustainment workforce. Secondly, to enable acquisition innovation. Third, build a secure and resilient defense industrial base. 4, ensure safe and resilient DoD installations. 5, promote acquisition and sustainment initiatives with key international partners. And I'm glad to see we have some of our international partners here today. And finally, 6, increase weapon system mission capability while reducing operating cost. I'm going to step through 5 of these quickly and then come back to the acquisition innovation, which is really the core of what we do in a little bit more detail. So in terms of recruiting, developing, and retaining a diverse workforce, we need to make sure that we are moving people around, giving them different experiences, that we are taking the Defense Acquisition University and making sure that we are using the best practices in terms of adult education. What does this mean? It's experiential learning. It's getting practitioners, PEOs, program managers in to talk about their programs, what went well, what didn't go well, and why. Actually giving actionable information and basically skill sets to PMs and PEOs that they can go right out and use. So we have reworked the curriculum a little bit so that our base courses are shorter, and what we've done is added a number of modules so that we can credential the workforce. The first three that we've rolled out are agile practices, digital engineering, and there's a third one that I'm losing right now, but there's a great third one out there. The point is, what we're doing is trying to give people skill sets that they can take back and apply right away. So, secondly, building a secure and resilient industrial base. We continue to look at the challenges we have, not only with small companies that don't have enough business to give them a business basically case to allow them to attract capital to grow. What we continue to see is that we fund out of the DoD or the government a lot of technologies, whether it's at universities, at labs, with small business grants, and then these companies cannot transition to self-sufficient ongoing entities. And what happens? In swoops China, Russia, other adversaries, frankly, that we have, and invest through shell companies. So we use laws we have, like countering foreign investment in the U.S. CFIUS, to block those cases. But again, that's defense. That's after the fact. What can we do to get in front of this? We have just rolled out a program called Trusted Capital, where we are acting as matchmakers in DoD, bringing together clean money capital providers with small companies in need of funding, focusing on specific issues, fragilities we have in our supply chain. The first venture day that we ran was in Austin, Texas, just last month, and we focused on small UAS. So we had DoD individuals there articulating what our needs are and what our challenges are. Frankly, companies like DJI have flooded the market with very, very low-cost systems, and they've put our U.S. industrial base out of business. So we know it's open source that a lot of that EOIR that's being recorded on DJI drones goes right back to China. So we can't buy those anymore. We've said in the DoD we will not buy DJI drones unless they're under very specific waived circumstances. What are we going to do? We need to get that ecosystem going. So we provided a matchmaking forum, if you will, between capital providers as well as the companies that need that capital infusion. We are going to continue to do this on a routine basis. We're looking at microelectronics. We're looking at critical portions of the integrated supply chain for 5G, which is a huge inflection point right now for us. We want to continue to come up with ways to really play offense, not just defense, in terms of the defense industrial base. We also are very concerned about safe and resilient DoD installations, and this takes many different forms. One, military housing. We have an issue right now with military housing. We've worked very closely with the services to come up with a housing bill of rights for our members that live on military installations. We will be rolling that out probably in conjunction with Congress. We were trying to tie that to the NDAA, which is a little bit slow in coming out, but I think we still will put it out at the same time as the NDAA. But we want to make sure that we are providing the correct type of installations for families. Also, from another vector here, we want to make sure that we have energy resilience. We know that one of our vulnerabilities is our electrical grid. If the grid goes down, we need power at our installations. So we're looking at a variety of innovative new technologies, one of them being small nuclear reactors that we could use on bases. So a whole variety of things going on. In terms of promoting acquisition and sustainment initiatives with key international partners, kind of the foundation of this is speeding up the foreign military sales process. So we are partnered very closely with the Department of State as well as the other interagency players in terms of foreign military sales to really come up with export reforms, particularly on unmanned aircraft systems, but also from an acquisition point of view to speed up the contracting process. We have a variety of Pathfinder programs that we're running where we are not doing as much in terms of total cost and pricing reviews. If it's the same item being sold a second time, we can take 6 to 12 months out of the process. And I personally am incredibly committed to this initiative because I've lived this on the industry side and the frustration of how long it takes sometimes to get under contract and having international customers say, I really want the U.S. solution, it's the best technology, but you know what, I just can't wait, so I'm going to China or I'm going to Russia. That is 180 degrees from what we want to see happen, particularly given our focus in the National Defense Strategy. So we will continue to work that one. Part of my job that's kind of interesting that frankly I didn't understand coming in is the number of bilateral relationships that I'm responsible for. And what I have found is there are really two levers we have quite often with international partners. One is acquisition programs and the other is technology. So I spend quite a bit of my time making sure that we have the overarching agreements to allow us to exchange technical data and that we are promoting those international sales, because we all know that it's an interoperable, multi-domain battle right now, and what differentiates the U.S. from our adversaries is when we go to war, we do not go alone. We go with our partners, and we want to make sure that those data links are the same, that the radios are the same, that we have the C2 we need to operate and prevail. So we also are focused on increasing weapon mission capability while reducing overall costs. And the program that I have spent the most time on is one that the Army is usually not a big fan of, F-35, although you benefit from it tremendously. But it's the biggest program we have in the department, and we're doing some things differently in the F-35 that we think translates to a lot of other programs. But it's really making sure that we understand the data set that describes what that weapon system does, and we decompose all the elements of cost to understand the hardware costs, the labor costs, and that we get those costs per flight hour down, and that we can track where the cost per flight hour is, that we can write contracts that incentivize industry to deliver the metrics that we need. We also obviously want to get mission capability up, and we tend to do very, very well with some deployed squadrons, and everybody else is 20% lower than that. We need to understand how to do those repair of reparables, how to get the spares at the outset, frankly, how to design for sustainability at the front end of contracts. So very, very important to us. So if we go back to goal number 2, which was acquisition innovation, again, I am concerned that while we have technological innovation at a pretty rapid pace throughout the world, especially here in the U.S., our business practices within the Department of Defense have not kept up with the rapidly evolving technology. And that's a wake-up call. We have enormous opportunity to improve how we do things in terms of contracting and acquiring goods and services. We also have to recognize that hardware and software are very, very different. We have treated them the same in the past. And frankly, we look at our platforms, our weapons today, as being hardware enabled, but software defined. and we have to rapidly move that software to increase the capability. One of the things we have done is really looked at the overall construct of how we contract. And typically, we've talked about sort of one way to do everything. You have DoD 5,000, and we sort of very happily tell everybody, just tailor it down to what you need. Well, if you don't know what's in there and you have been punished in the past, particularly getting called up for hearings on the Hill and all those types of fun things, you tend to be a tad risk averse, especially if you don't have a full understanding of what the tools are that you have to use. So we said we were going to do a fundamental rewrite this year of DoD 5000, and we are very close to crossing the finish line on that. And just because I have this coveted right after lunch speaking slot here, I thought I would bring some handouts to keep everybody interested. So what this spiffy little trifold has is what we call our adaptive acquisition framework. And what you will see is we've broken down different pathways for how to acquire goods and services, which just reminds me, I couldn't remember before the first new module that we have coming out at DAU, and it's acquisition of services, because half of what we procure, and remember, we procure about $350 billion worth of stuff each year at the Pentagon. People don't realize half of that is services. So we need to teach people how to procure services. So we acknowledge that, and we are rewriting the service portion next year. But what we've done is we have a small base policy with a lot of annexes to it that discuss cybersecurity, for instance, a huge focus that we have at this point. We talk about systems engineering to include mission engineering. We talk about a whole variety of different things, but one of the things I'm most excited about is that we have a separate software pathway. Because software is different than hardware. So that policy is in coordination right now in the Pentagon. This coordination, many of you have a military background, but this term was new to me when I came to the Pentagon. I was used to going to meetings and projecting things on a screen in industry and having people around the table and editing in real time and hitting print and having everybody sign off on it. We don't do that typically at the Pentagon, although I'm trying very hard to change that. What we do is we put everything in a big, thick binder, and it goes snail mail around, and everybody marks it up. Then you get all the non-concurs back, and then you adjudicate the non-concurs. Then you get the new document, and you start the process all over again. It's not moving at the speed of relevance from my point of view. So what we are doing is we're trying to speed that cycle up and actually projecting things on the screen and talking about it, editing real time. But we have a whole number of things we're doing with this, with really 4 broad categories of initiatives in terms of acquisition innovation. It's restructuring the acquisition policy and guidance, and part of the guidance is providing vignettes of what right looks like on certain types of acquisitions. For certain acquisition authorities, what are the contract types that are most appropriate? And then give an example of when they were used correctly and incorrectly. We are building out the DAU website. It has an enormous amount of information, and we're really kind of excited about the number of clicks we're getting because people are actually going and learning from the website, which is important. Also, as I mentioned earlier, the second thing is contracting at the speed of relevance. We are looking at speeding things up. Part of what we're doing as an overarching portion of this is reviewing all of the DFARs. And in fact, we have a 15% reduction right now in the DFARs clauses, and we are continuing to beat those back down. We're also, again, strengthening and securing the defense industrial base, and then we're looking at effective training of the workforce. These 4 things will really help us with the acquisition innovation. So Kevin Fahey, Stacy Cummings are really doing a fantastic job of working this adaptive acquisition framework. We are partnering very closely with industry associations to make sure we get input. We quarterly hold meetings. They rotate between AIA, NDIA, PSC. We have CEOs come from all the member organizations. I usually bring about 15 people with me from the building to those, including service SAEs, DCMA, DCAA, DSCA, all the different agencies. That is really your forum as industry to talk to us, because we only have so many hours in the day and so many slots to meet with people. I really strongly advocate that you use AUSA, use all these other groups to come and talk to us, because when General Ham calls me up and says, hey, we have a lot of Army concerns, industry suppliers are concerned about A, B, and C, that's great. I can respond to AUSA. I cannot legally respond to a lot of individual people. So that type of feedback's very, very, very important. So we're really trying to provide flexibility and efficiency with what we're doing. We're hoping people will use everything that we have on our website, and I am incredibly committed to making sure we become a much easier place to do work with, that we're cyber secure, that we are using commercial practices where practicable, and that we really are growing the defense industrial base to be extremely diverse, and that we are not lagging behind commercial industry. So with that, I want to thank AUSA for giving me a chance to have this conversation and hopefully open it up for a number of questions.
Thank you, ma'am. You mentioned early on a little bit about Chinese-born students in our universities, and to just pull on that thread a little bit, how can DoD and other agencies crack down on Chinese espionage without creating a chilling environment for the vast majority of Chinese-born students and workers who are making America more productive and innovative?
I think we have to look at the pipeline of students coming in. And what we are talking about is coming up with questionnaires about individuals working on DoD funded research projects. And there are a number of questions we can ask as to whether or not they belong to certain organizations. We just don't do that right now. And we can talk about some of the laws we have around intellectual property and other things. Right now, we do not have standard clauses in our contracts, and we do not have questionnaires that uniformly go out. So that's the first step. So we got to not let them in. Then from an interagency point of view, it's really an issue in terms of visas right at the get-go, and having certain individuals come in that are designated by the Chinese government as, special people that are out looking for technology to bring back to China.
Sydney Friedberg, Breaking Defense, ma'am. One of the themes that's run through this morning, and not just this morning, is the Army has this panoply of 31 signature programs, 6 modernization initiatives, 8 CFTs. All that stuff is over in R&E world right now. It's prototyping, it's developing, but at some point, this great mass of stuff is going to slam into the procurement side. How can OSD acquisition statement help the Army make that transition without busting the budget or overloading the system, which is a real concern a lot of people have raised, including in the Army?
So I don't envision things slamming from R&E into A&S. In fact, it's a continuum. One good example is IVAS. I was just down for a VIP day about 4 weeks ago, And we in ANS worked very hard with Futures Command to make sure that those contracts were written in a way that we took advantage of all the acquisition authorities we had with the most appropriate contract types to get Microsoft on contract very quickly. And in fact, the very reason that we have the progress on that program today, where we can all run around and look at augmented reality that's pretty impressive with a bunch of cutting-edge Microsoft engineers, is because the Army was able to embrace those contracting authorities and move very quickly and go through a series of iterations in the technology, maturing it. And I had conversations with the Microsoft engineers who were there shoulder to shoulder with the Army, brewing their special coffee they brought with them, which was very good, to talk about the fact this wasn't a standard DoD program, and they wouldn't have been interested if it was a 7-year program, but the fact that it's a 3-year program and they see tangible results makes a difference. So we partner very, very closely with Bruce Jetty and the entire team in the Army from an acquisition point of view, sharing ideas about how to move quickly, and I don't see things slamming. I think Secretary McCarthy is working very, very hard along with General McConville to have everybody focused on the same goals and objectives, and we're all pulling together here. So ANS is here to enable the Army, not to hinder them. And by talking about these programs and what we're trying to accomplish early on, then we can get somewhere. And we also have to be bold enough to say when something isn't working and stop it.
Ma'am, another question from the audience. Can you share your thoughts on how the DoD is diving down the sustainment costs while encouraging innovative solutions from commercial suppliers who are outside the established supply chain with the traditional OEMs?
I think it all begins with understanding intellectual property rights at the very beginning of programs. We just put out a new intellectual property policy, so we have an individual in ANS spearheading an intellectual property cadre, and then we have individuals from each of the services working together. And the whole focus of the policy is to make sure we understand upfront in a program, at milestone A, what is that intellectual property that is required typically for sustainment reasons, and not to defer that discussion until milestone C when it all becomes very murky. So that's the first step, to understand what we need to sustain systems, because typically you don't want that OEM to be the sustainer long term. You want to be able to go out once you're in full rate production, steady state, and compete that. So intellectual property rights are number one. Number two is designing for sustainability so that we have modular architectures where we can upgrade sensors or weapons or whatever it might be as technology moves along. We want to make sure that as we sustain systems, we're also upgrading them. I think the Air Force particularly is doing a very good job of that relative to software. So it's all a continuum between acquisition and sustainment, and I think doing software development with Agile and DevOps is the perfect example of that. You're really doing development, production, and sustainment, and testing all at once in a continuum if you're doing it correctly. And we'd love to get to really a more agile methodology for hardware as well.
Hi, Ashley Roki with Jane's Defense. Sort of to dovetail on Sydney's question in your response, there seems to be a growing divide between the acquisition and requirements communities within the Army, sort of highlighted by the Bradley replacement and lack of competition at this point. What concerns do you have with lack of competition? You'd also mentioned that you are now looking at the OMFB also. Could you detail sort of what that involves and your thoughts on making sure there is more competition within these programs?
So competition is everybody's friend, and I think it comes down to understanding requirements early, understanding the impact of requirements, trading them off with cost and schedule. So the Army has to make up its own mind about how it wants to move forward. But I think we're in a learning phase, particularly with vehicles. And our job is to make sure that we understand the critical technologies moving forward and that we have an industrial base that can bring a variety of technologies to meet the different requirements.
Ma'am, thank you again for being here. Let's give Ms. Lord a big round of applause.